Ecclesiastes chapter 11, the end of this is addressed beginning in verse 9. Solomon writes to the young and lays down some principles that are fundamental to learning about life. It was once said in our society that there are 3 R's to education, as they said, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Obviously, spelling was not one of those. But a way to summarize the basic approach to some of the skills that are common in our society. And if we are pursuing a life where we need those skills, then the sooner we get those basic principles in mind and then learn how to put them into practice, then the better off we'll be in many ways. When Ecclesiastes chapter 11, beginning in verse 9 and down through 12 and verse 1, there's also 3 R's that Solomon here again addresses to the young, but apply for all of us. And so read with me these verses and look for these 3 R's. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these God will bring you into judgment. Therefore remove sorrow from your heart, and put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. In other words, they're quickly passing away. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near, when you say, I have no pleasure in them. So did you see them? Rejoice, remove, and remember. If we can remember these 3 basic fundamentals, then day by day, year by year, learn how to apply these 3 words, then we'll have the basic building blocks, the basic fundamental tools that we need for the rest of life and all of our decisions. But I want to apply each of these to 3 gifts that God gives to us, and that is the different relationships we have in life, and our body, and our time. And so first, let's think about rejoicing in the life that God gives us. Suicide is often the result of someone who did not know or who did not want to know the kinds of things that Solomon talks about in the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes doesn't have every answer to every question, but it has just about every question, at least in principle, that we wrestle with and deal with. People who commit suicide are not always the stereotypical person who looks as though they're miserable. They're often people who appear to have everything, and the interconnectedness of our society reveals that. You can find the headlines and the names and the photographs of people who have chosen to end their own life. Solomon writes not to remove joy from our life. Some of the things he says are hard and require some hard decisions by us. But everything that Solomon writes is aimed at this, to give us the opportunity to rejoice in this life and then even in higher ground. And so as he talks about rejoicing, notice he says, rejoice and walk in the ways of your heart. Now that's not the end of it, but just start there. He says, rejoice, especially in your youth. You have ideas, you have plans and goals, and in all of them, he says, enjoy that. And think about how Solomon did that back in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. I won't go back and read it, but you remember he pursued the things that he would enjoy. And so he tried education and learning. He tried laughter, just finding things that he enjoyed just because he enjoyed it. He tried work and music and projects and different collections. In general, he tried about anything that typically people try to enjoy life. And then he came to the point where he says all is vanity, not that it's all a waste, but he was asking the question, well, but what is the value of it, especially because my life is going to end when I die? What was the benefit? What was the value of the joy that I had from those things? And so, like Solomon, we'll benefit We can rejoice if we'll stop and ask ourselves, well, why do I enjoy what I enjoy? Why am I pursuing the things that I am? What's the value of it? We could take another lesson and go through Ecclesiastes chapter 2. What's the value of the things that Solomon pursued? What's the value of learning? What's the value of laughter? What's the value of work, of music, of collections, of projects? It's not that there's not any value to any of them, but if we ask ourselves, what is the value? Well, the greater the value of the things that we pursue, then the more joy that there is to them. So there are some things that are of little value, and they provide little joy. And there are things of greater, richer, deeper value. Well, they actually produce a richer, deeper, greater joy. So ask yourself, what is the value of what I rejoice in, what I enjoy? And then ask, what's the longevity of the joy and the things that I pursue to get that joy? What's the longevity of the joy of all those things in Ecclesiastes 2? What's the longevity of what I learn? What's the longevity of the joy from laughter, from music, from work, from collections, from treasures, from hobbies? None of these things in and of themselves are sinful, but we could probably all go through and say, well, the longevity of the joy of a song is not as long as the things that I learn because of the benefit. But some people might really like music, and they might rank it differently in some ways. The point is, the longer the joy lasts, then the greater the benefit, the greater the value of it. And so Solomon opens this up, and he's opened up his own life and the things that he has written to say it's okay to rejoice in life. He has not written to say to go to heaven, you've got to be just miserable for a few days, and then you can have life and have it abundantly. No, Jesus has come and provided all of that, but especially on earthly things, Solomon says we can rejoice. And so consider for a few minutes rejoicing in the relationships. God has blessed us by the relationships that He offers to us in this life. And while relationships also goes in a variety of directions, there are several proverbs that talk about friendships. And that covers a lot of ground. Consider the wisdom of Solomon about rejoicing in the friendships that we have. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 26 says, "The righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray." If I want to rejoice in the relationships that I have, then I need to choose wisely in choosing those relationships. And part of that means not letting our culture, not letting the way that our society, the people who most influence us, not making our decisions about friendships the way that they do. That typically will limit it to your peers. You should be the best of friends with those who are closest to your age. Well, you can find good friends there, but don't limit your pool of influence in a friendship simply to those who are your age. Proverbs 17 and verse 17, "A friend loves at all times." If you want to rejoice in your friendship, then this goes both ways. Choose friends, choose people, find people who demonstrate that they're willing to love at all times. And then test yourself by that. Are you the kind of friend who loves at all times? There's joy even in sharing our sorrows together and not just the celebrations. Proverbs 27 and verse 6. "Faithful are the wounds of a friend." If I want to rejoice in relationships, then again I need to be willing to give this. I need to be willing to receive this. And this is actually the kind of friendship that will produce the most joy, of the best kind of joy, is the kind of friend who's willing to wound me, like a parent maybe gives a shot to their child or some medicine that tastes disgusting. But parents are willing to do that because they genuinely love their children. So likewise, friends are willing to hurt us when it helps us. Have that kind of friend, be that kind of friend, and there is joy in that kind of a relationship. But if I can't give a wound, if I can't receive a wound from someone who have shown themselves to love me, then there is a problem. Proverbs 27, verse 9. Ointment and perfume delight the heart, and the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by hearty counsel. So how do I rejoice in these relationships? Again, I surround myself with people who can give me good counsel. That also, contrary to sometimes the thinking of our society, says I need friends who are older than me, wiser than me, people who I'm willing to talk to, people who I'm willing to listen to, so that I can receive hearty counsel. Not always easy to hear, but iron sharpens iron. And what happens when iron hits iron? There's some heat, there's some friction, there's some sparks. It's usually not a fire, but just some sparks. And as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. This is when two are better than one. Ecclesiastes 4, remember those examples that he gave. Two is better than one when the two are united in the goals of their relationship and in the wisdom that is described here. And so rejoice in your youth, rejoice in your friendships, and especially the way to do that is by using the wisdom of Solomon. Think about the gift of the human body. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 29 says, "The glory of a young man is his strength." And so especially the physical abilities that are available in our youth, it's a gift, but it's a gift that's in the hourglass that is changing little by little, almost unnoticeable. But the strength of your arms, the strength of your legs, the strength of your eyes and of your ears and of your voice. If your Bible's still in Ecclesiastes 12, you could just go down through. Maybe you've read it before. And verses 2 through 5 remind us that of the gradual changes of the human body. And so this is especially written to the youth who don't understand that yet, who have not experienced that yet, to start to cue them in and to clue them into the fact that the strength that they have, the strength that you have in your youth is slowly changing. It's over time. And so part of the lesson is rejoice in that. Use that for your enjoyment and for the benefit and the pleasure of others as well. Certainly not a standalone point, but rejoice in the use of your body, because that will change. And then rejoice in the gift that God gives us of time, and not just the hands moving around a clock, and not just being alive, but Ecclesiastes 3, another well-known section, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. There is a time for every purpose. A time to be born, a time to die, and then Solomon goes on in the next few verses to summarize everything that happens between. So there's a variety of seasons, there's a variety of occasions in life, and we can rejoice in all of them, or at least we have some reason to rejoice, even in the hardest, saddest, most perplexing, most difficult decisions or circumstances. There is some reason that God provides for us to be able to rejoice. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 2, even in the most difficult of circumstances, often that of the death of those whom we love, well, there's something to learn there. Better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. And if I take something that I learn from the death of someone, especially that I know and love, then I can rejoice in God providing that opportunity, and hopefully at the death of those that we love, we can rejoice in the comfort of God's care for them at that time. So these are timeless lessons, of course, but especially Solomon says that if you count yourself to be in the days of your youth, then yes, view this as a unique opportunity and a unique time to be able to rejoice. Rejoice in your relationships and in your body and in your time. But rejoicing is not the end. because he goes on to say in verse 10 that really an essential part of being able to rejoice is being able to remove some things. Part of ongoing joy is learning. He talks about sorrow and evil. That's what you need to learn to remove in the days of your youth. Remove sorrow and remove evil. And that's what will provide the opportunity for rejoicing. And so the list of things that we need to remove is obviously a long, lengthy one. But think about what we should remove from relationships. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22, we don't know how young Timothy was, but he was a young man to some degree, because Paul tells him to flee youthful lusts. And so that summarizes part of what will bring evil and will bring sorrow in all relationships of life. But considering the Proverbs that we read a few minutes ago, when we think about the earthly friendships that we have, and the process of choosing a spouse would be included in that, what our society calls the dating relationship, but not limited to that. When we learn what brings sorrow, as the book of Ecclesiastes and the book of Proverbs especially helps to develop our insight into, when we remove the things that bring sorrow and evil into relationships, then this is the key to being able to rejoice in those things. Let me just give two examples. First of all, think of how sexual immorality brings sorrow and evil into those who participate in it, but then also even to every part of those relationships. It brings sin, that's the most obvious. Especially in the young, it brings all kinds of confusion and distrust that lasts often for the rest of their life. God provides some degree of relief from that when we move on by faith in that higher ground, as we sang a few minutes ago. Our society has demonstrated the sorrow and the evil that comes from abortion. And so there has been the murder of millions of children because of the decision of sexual immorality. And at times there are Christians also. That's a part of their past. They've been forgiven of it, but the scar remains. There is the sorrow and the stress that is glorified sometimes in our society of having a child without having a spouse. And so when father and mother are not husband and wife, that brings sorrow and strains that are not necessary. So you can't avoid every kind of sorrow in life. But Solomon is just pointing out there are some things that will bring sorrow, that will bring evil. Remove those. And then you'll better understand how to rejoice in the time of your youth. Likewise, the prevalence of pornography in our society gives another illustration of how sin brings sorrow and evil, not just to the one who commits it and participates in it, but to relationships. Might even be worth thinking for a minute, how do you define pornography? Decades ago, it was just thought, well, that's what you had to sneak down to the convenience store to find. But what is it? If it's simply the looking at nakedness that is not mine to look at, and we put it into that category, then is there pornography on the television shows in the middle of the day and constantly on the internet? The fact is, our young people have seen more nakedness than probably any generation in history, because it's so available and you can't escape it. We have a few less billboards in Alaska than other places, but it's there. It's in the stores. They call it an advertisement. It's pornography, and it doesn't just it affects the young and the old. And not doing a whole lesson on that subject, but it doesn't just affect the person, that's one subject, but it affects relationships. It affects how you will view the opposite gender. It affects how you will view your spouse one day. And it affects your own trustworthiness. There are lines and barriers that are crossed, and the consequences of it remove the opportunity to rejoice in many ways, not in every way. And again, any of these sins, God forgives us. He provides a relief from the guilt of those things. But remove sorrow and remove evil, and two are better than one when they are committed to removing these things from their relationship. Let's think about, again, the gift that God has given us of our physical body. Remove sorrow and remove evil. Think of your body, especially with the knowledge that you are also a spirit. And so God has given you this body. A spirit can't taste a cinnamon roll. A spirit can't enjoy many of the things that we do in our body. And so your body is a gift by which God allows you to experience and learn about many things. And so how do you use something that is a gift? Among the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 23 is self-control. And that also applies in a variety of ways. But think about it in our society, how many experiences there are that are contrary to simply that part of the fruit of the Spirit, self-control, tobacco, alcohol, and all the spectrum of drugs. They are addictive in their nature. And so when I am addicted, then I'm guilty of sin because I've given up and I'm doing that which contradicts self-control. How does the lack of self-control, how does addiction bring sorrow? We can walk around town, sadly, and observe that many times. How does it bring evil? Again, probably just in our own observations, maybe in our family, or just in our life, we've seen that. And so remove sorrow, remove evil, and here's a part of the simple key of that: self-control. Remove sorrow, remove evil. Ephesians 5:18 says, "Do not be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit." Do not be drunk with wine. That simple phrase will remove sorrow and remove evil. It will protect you from that. And again, the illustrations in our society would fill the rest of our day. Part of the reason that's so deceptive in our society is because of the idea, well, I just have a beer or two and so I'm okay. There are people whose lives have been ended because of that fallacy. After one beer, the average person is drunk and sinning and losing self-control. Sometimes people have questions, well, but Jesus turned water to wine. What about that? That also is another subject, but let me just boil it down this way. They had wine that could intoxicate, but they also could design their wine so that it would not intoxicate. They could do different things to it so that it would not intoxicate. In our society, the word wine typically describes a drink that is crafted for what purpose? To intoxicate. They're called intoxicating beverages. They are made to do that. There were beverages in the first century and before that and after that were designed to avoid intoxication. But in our society, we're typically dealing with things that are designed to bring intoxication. And so that summarizes the difference. The point is that intoxication brings sorrow, it brings evil. And so here in just a few words, God offers to protect us from all of that if we will be sober. Interesting, I heard an interview with the mayor of London. He was in California to see, because I think in the UK pot is still illegal, but he came to observe how has California's approach to pot, how has that worked out. And at the end of that interview, he said, and he was clearly for legalizing it. He said, what I want us to do is just to sit down, have an open mind, and have a good, sober discussion about the subject. And I thought, wow, you just answered it for yourself. Let's have a sober conversation. That's what we ought to do, and God will protect us from sorrow and evil by that. And then let's think about the gift of time. What should I remove from the use of my time so that I can rejoice? Let's start with the easiest, the softball question. Well, sin. In 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 3, notice what Peter has to say about sin and its connection to our time. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 3, Peter says, "For we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries." So Peter recognizes, and the people he's writing to can recognize, we've wasted enough time already in the lewdness and the lust and the revelings, things that were obviously so common in their society, that he says when you don't participate in those things, you stand out, you're strange, people think you're weird, and they'll tell you that. And again, our society, these are business activities. These are things that even from a young age our children are sometimes trained in. The schools host dances, which are training grounds in lewdness. There are businesses aimed at lewdness and lust and drunkenness, so you're weird if you're the one who doesn't participate in these things. But expect that. There are industries and professionals whose goal is primarily to capture your time, to capture your attention. People are trained in how to grab your eye and then to keep you there. Started to have the word and then it left me, but the analytics that they discuss with YouTube and Facebook and other things, there are people who know how to grab our attention and keep it. The CEO of Netflix said this. He said, fundamentally, we're about eliminating loneliness and boredom. That's what entertainment does. So entire industries that are aimed at people who are bored, in other words, they don't know how to use their time. They don't have a challenging, an engaging way to use their time. And so here's lots of people making millions, maybe billions of dollars on loneliness and boredom. I'm not saying a Christian would never be lonely, would never be bored, but God offers solutions when we find ourselves lonely or when we find ourselves bored. Things like the short list of things in Romans 12, 9 to 13. You can go and read that later, but it's a list of things that involve us with other Christians. If the things of that verse, if we make those a daily and or weekly and or monthly habit, according to our own abilities and times and all those factors we have to consider for ourselves, but you can use Netflix to battle boredom and loneliness, or God also provides a variety of tools, a multi-tool for loneliness and for boredom. God provides for us principles to point us in the direction of not just how to spend our time, but who to spend our time with. And parents, training your children in how to budget their time, how to use and to recognize time as a gift, is a part of bringing them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so, yes, sometimes rejoicing means denying myself some things. It's exactly what what Solomon is saying. And so, what do you need to remove in order to be able to rejoice? Well, the third R for learning, rejoice, remove, the third is remember. Some things that we need to remember, because sometimes we're deceived into thinking what we expect to bring joy, it often doesn't. Eve is the first example of that, isn't it? And so who is it that knows best about what will bring joy? Remember, Solomon started by saying, well, rejoice in the days of your youth, walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But now he reminds us that there is someone, there is your Creator, someone who made your mind, someone who makes all those chemicals in your brain that fire off and are sent through, that give us that experience that we call pleasure. There's someone who created all of that. There's someone who knows what will bring joy, and the best kind of joy, the most enduring kind of joy. And so if you'll remember your Creator, then you'll learn how to rejoice, and you will learn what to remove. Remember your Creator in your relationships. And among the first relationships, we have some relationships we are born into that we don't choose. But as we grow, among the first relationships that we need to choose, and then as we mature and we learn how to develop relationships, and could go back to those Proverbs and apply them in some ways to our Creator. Being a friend, having friendship with God and not with the world, that's where we need to start. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13 tells us to fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man, or this is man's all. A few different ways that verse is translated. But what that is telling us is there is a Creator who gave you a heart, who gave you a soul, who has given you a mind, who has given you strength. And Jesus said something about those, didn't He? Love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's how you develop a friendship, so to speak, with your Creator. Share those things with Him that He has given to you. And how do you do that with someone that you can't see? It is a challenge. And that is another lesson, but that's a question for you to answer. How do I give my heart and soul and mind and strength to someone that I cannot see? Part of that, turn to Ephesians chapter 5. Worship is part of the answer, but another part of that is in our relationships with people whom He has given to us. So how do I remember my Creator and develop my love for my Creator? Part of that is seen in the way that I love the people whom He has given to me. So I'm going to read this entire paragraph, Ephesians 5:22 to chapter 6 and verse 4, making little or no comment. But here's part of how I grow in my relationship with my Lord. It's by the things that He teaches me in these relationships. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church, and He is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself for her, that He might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that He might present her to Himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of His body, of His flesh, and of His bones. For this reason, a man shall leave father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. No family rejoices like the family who remembers their Creator in their relationships with each other. Remember your Creator in the use of your body. Proverbs chapter 3 summarizes some of what we've already thought about this morning. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 7 and 8 says, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones." In verse 16, "Length of days is in her hand," right hand, talking about wisdom. "In her left hand, riches and honor." So it really is true physically and emotionally and psychologically and whatever other things would describe our physical bodies, and spiritually. We are benefited in every way by knowing that there is a Creator and knowing what the Creator has said and knowing what He offers to us and what He expects from us. Fear God and keep His commandments, and this will be a physical benefit to you, and of course even more so spiritually. Remember your Creator. He's given you this gift we call time. What time really teaches us is limitations. Look at Psalm 39, verses 4 through 6. Remember your Creator when you recognize that time is limited. And that happens sometimes when we accomplish something at the end of something. Well, that helps us to look back and realize the limitations. I didn't do everything that I wanted to do maybe, but now that time is over, that season is over, that opportunity is over. And so Psalm 39 verses 4 through 6 says, "Lord, make me to know my end, and what is the measure of my days, that I may know how frail I am. Indeed, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my age as nothing before you. Certainly every man at his best state is but a vapor. Surely every man walks about like a shadow. Surely they busy themselves in vain. He heaps up riches and does not know who will gather them." Be constantly mindful that the reason that you can't do everything that you wanted to do, you can't get everything done, is because of time, because God has limited you. That was His decision. There was something He wanted us to understand by limiting our lifetime, as the psalmist here observes. And because our life is limited, everything else is limited. And so remember your Creator in the limitations of time. And then Solomon ends the book of Ecclesiastes, "For God will bring into judgment the deeds of the body, for God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil." And so remember your Creator and remember your Judge and all that has been said about relationships. That God is going to judge you based on the kind of friend you are, husband you are, wife you are, child you are, brother you are, sister you are, and not just child in the sense of our childhood, as long as you have a father or a mother, grandparents and grandchildren. You have a Creator and you have a Judge. Remember your Judge in the use of your body. Let your body be a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God. The worn out phrase in our society, used in so many ways, "Well, it's my body," and then fill in the blank, is simply not true. You've been given it for a limited amount of time, but your body has a Creator and your body has a Judge. And remember your Judge in the use of your time, because your time is limited, and therefore your time and my time comes to an end, and then we give an answer to God for the use of our time. As I said in the beginning, these principles are not just for children, but from their youth, our children are learning these things. And so parents, you have about 20 years, give or take maybe a few, to impress on our children whose minds are constantly growing and hearing and seeing and learning. You've got 20 years to get this into the mind of your children, among other things. Rejoice, remove, and remember. If you're in the days of your youth, you are surrounded by people who have zero interest in the things that we've read this morning. I don't mean everybody, but I mean for the majority of people who are your age, really young or old, but especially to the young. You're surrounded by people not interested in these things. That means you have to seek out these things, and you have to find people with an interest in these things. But ultimately, you have to be interested in these things. Heaven will be a place of rejoicing because sorrow and evil will be removed. And hell will be a place of sorrow and evil because joy will be removed. People who decided they thought they could rejoice without God. So turn your songbooks to number 329. Fear God and keep His commandments. If you believe that Jesus is the Christ, then in your heart, repent of your sins. Use your body by confessing your faith. Let your body be washed with pure water, and the blood of Christ will wash away your sins. That's why Jesus said, "He that believes and is baptized shall be saved." If as a Christian you have forgotten some things, not rejoiced because of what you have not removed, then God offers the greatest relief in a very moment, the forgiveness of sin and the confidence of a restored hope. If our prayers can help you in that, if we simply need a reminder by teaching and admonishing one another to live in Him and live in these things, tell us how we could help you as we stand and sing.